So I decided that I wanted to go for the highest thing that I could get, which was pre-med, for no reason other than I wanted to be in the highest one that they had available. I went to a chemistry class, and the Lord said, "You will not do pre-med anymore." All right, so it was very clear. One of those moments where I felt the very clear call from God to get out of there. But I used to go on Saturdays. I would go to Instituto Bíblico, or Biblical Institute, which is where a lot of the pastors, the denomination that was there at the time, they would go to school, right? That's what they would study. And so I went to that school, and I thought that it was a joke in a way, right? Like literally, so the person that was teaching one of my classes, they took the class the year before. I was like, what? Like, if you teach psychology, you don't show up the next, all right, guys, you have to be a doctor in psychology. So it really hit me, why is it that this lower level of education, right? And so I looked at some of the books. My books were from 1960s and 1950s. Nothing wrong with the 60s and the 50s. But if I was studying history or science or any other material, and I was using books from the 50s and the 60s, then I'll probably feel like I need to get new books. I need to get more updated books. So I really felt disappointed with that reality, and I felt that I really wanted to fulfill my call. So again, the Lord was saying, get out of chemistry. I was still in pre-med, and I was kind of figuring out some things while I was going through my first year of college at the University of Puerto Rico. And one day, I was part of this group. We were doing an evangelistic community event, much like some of the ones that we do here. And I went to visit a church to invite that church to be a part of it. And in the little lobby of the office for the pastor, there was a magazine in English, and that's the first time I saw the words Bible and college together. And basically 30 days after I picked up that magazine, I was accepted into one of the universities that I saw in the magazine because I wanted to study the Bible. I wanted to study. I had a passion to be able to make it accessible to everybody. I wanted to be able to teach and connect with the Bible in a deep way. So I went to Evangel University, right? And so this is Evangel. This is the lawn of Evangel University. And again, I went to Evangel because it was the best accredited one out of the ones that were in the magazine, and because it was in Springfield, Missouri. And Springfield, Missouri was the headquarters of the Assemblies of God, which was the denomination I belonged to at the time. So I wanted to study in the best place that I could. So I went to Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri. So again, if somebody leaves Puerto Rico to go to Missouri, to live there so that they can study the Bible, then they're a little gung-ho about it, right? They're trying to go deep. They're trying to take this thing serious. And again, it wasn't cheap, right? Not only did I have to use all my benefits from the Army to be able to pay for school, but I had to work, I had to take loans, I had to save every penny that I had to work at Matthew's Pizza across the street. But I told myself, I'm here on the Bible Belt in the Midwest, where everything started in my mind, in the headquarters of the Assemblies of God. I come here to learn the Bible with a bunch of other students that are all interested in the same goal, to be the best they can be, right? But then when I started going to classes and I started going to chapel, what I found out that some students were forced to be there because their parents said, if I'm going to pay for school, you're going to go to a Christian school so that you can behave and be a good kid. And you don't do the things that some of the state university students do. Ironically, right, some of those students did some of the crazy stuff with the very kids from the state university that was just down the street, right? Because if you really want to do something, you do it. So students were forced to be there. Students were sleeping through chapel. I remember there was a second floor to the chapel, and one of the student job was to be able to keep track of who was sleeping during chapel and who was awake and whatever. You had a assigned seat, and somebody had to sit in your assigned seat, and you can only miss so many. But then people will pay you to sit on their seat if you have extra ones. Right? So it's not what I had in mind. Some of the students could care less about Christ, or could care less about the church. They had some, they went to play sports, so they just happened to go to that school, and they could care less. So I was like, what? Right? What is this? And you might ask yourself, well, why do I share this? Why share this story with you? Well, the Reformation is this time in history in the 1600s and 15,000s where the church kind of gets revitalized and where Protestant church comes from, right? So before that, most churches were Catholic, and there's a separation that takes place. Now, hopefully you remember this from your history class in school, in civilization history or something along those ways. But the Reformation, in a way, is known for a rediscovery of the Word of God, right? There's a period of time where the Bible became accessible to people. While before the Reformation, only the leaders and the experts, right? So I was the expert as a pastor or a priest, and I would tell you about the Bible, and you should not read it because you don't know what you're reading, but I know what, so you depended on me to tell you what to think or what to believe. But now, right, we take that for granted. Now you have probably some 100 Bibles in your cell phone, right, that you can access at any point in time. You might have a Bible at home. You might have all kinds of apps and all kinds of tools that you have to access the Bible. Before that, right, before Wycliffe, that was not true or a reality. So in most of Europe and in most of the world at the time, or the known world at the time, or most of Europe, the Reformation came because of this eagerness to be able to rediscover the Word of God. Now, there's other factors and other realities, but obviously we don't have the time to get into that. But in England, it was a little bit different because in England, the Reformation arrived in 1531, not because people wanted to read the Bible more, or not because, although that was true for some of the people in England, and not because they were trying to have a deeper fervor for God, although that was true for some of the people in England, but because this guy, Henry VIII, wanted to get remarried. So he wanted to get remarried, but the Catholic Church at the time did not allow him to get remarried. And the Catholic Church said, you can't get divorced and remarry, right? You can't do it. So if you're going to be a king, you got to follow the rules. And again, you might remember from watching The Crown or watching some of the movies. I just watched on Netflix a movie called The King with Timothy Chalamet or whatever his name is. So you might have seen some of those moments where there's a coronation and the priest prays for them and anoints them and put the things, right? So for you to be a king, you needed the church, and the church needed the king, and the king needed the church, and the king will affirm the priest. The king will affirm the church, and the church will affirm the king. And this was two institutions that kind of held each other together. By the way, that's still true to this day in England, right? So we went to the Anglican church. We sang the national anthem of England in church, right? Well, I was like, wow, that's different, right? Like that's a different reality here. And we went, and the priest in his sermon in one of the services that we went in England went on and on about how Mary and Elizabeth II, that passed away recently, how they were similar to each other and so on and so forth. Not something, right? Not something that you're going to hear here, right? I don't think too many pastors in the United States are going to be preaching about how, Joseph is like Trump or Mary is like Kamala or something like this. That's not something that a pastor is going to get into. But again, this is a different time, right? Church scratched the back of the king, and the king scratched the back of the church. And then Henry VIII said, what, you're not going to let me get remarried? Then I'm out. So he, in 1531, said, I am the head of the church. So I'm going to be the head of the church. So there were buildings that were Catholic church, and he just went and took them and changed the sign in the front, and he put Anglican church. And now they went literally from one Sunday, they went from being a Catholic church to being an Anglican church under the king. They went from being under the Pope to be under the king. So that's how Reformation primarily took place within the context of England. And you might ask yourself, well, why do I care about that? Hold on, I'm going to get to it. By the time that it arrived to the 1700s, the Church of England had lost its fervor for discipleship or spiritual growth, and there was a lot. Of course, there were always people that God is using to reform, to reconnect, and to work through. But many people had seen this play between the king and the church, and they had seen like, oh, this is all politics. This is not even church anymore. Like, so people had taken for granted, not respect the church, or not being a part of this process. But what happens is the church, again, in this process of the church becoming so shallow, there were two young people, young brothers, that decided that they wanted to be pastors, and they wanted to be deep as they can possibly be. So they go to the University of Oxford. I think we have a picture of the University of Oxford here. So this is the University of Oxford. This is one of the places I got the privilege to visit. This is not one of the pictures I took, but this is the University of Oxford. This is where they, for those of you who might be wondering, this is the place where they record or film most of Harry Potter, right? So some of you are like, oh, okay, now I'm paying attention. Anyway, so this is where they recorded a lot of Harry Potter. You can see by some of the buildings. And if you really like Harry Potter, I got tons of pictures I can show you that you would love to watch. But Oxford University is a little bit different than many universities. They're not, so you know, if there's a University of Puerto Rico or Florida State or UCF, they might be divided in colleges in the sense that there is, you know, the College of Music and the College of Education and the College of whatever it is, right? Medicine. But the reality is they still are one university, one institution. They're really regulated by one. The University of Oxford is not that way. The University of Oxford are 37 universities or colleges that are loosely associated with each other. So they are all in the same location. But for example, if I want to go to All Souls College, I got to apply to All Souls College, not to the University of Oxford. There is no University of Oxford application. If I want to go to Lincoln College, if I want to go to Christ Church, which is confusing because that's the name of a college, not a church, but that's actually the one that these brothers went to, then I applied there. But that created kind of a freedom, a place of collaborative kind of education and a freedom to kind of go in different directions. And Oxford, the majority of those scholars were created to educate clergy, to develop pastors so that they could lead churches. But when these two brothers show up to the University of Oxford with the hopes of becoming spiritual leaders, they find that, what do they find? They find students forced to be there, sleeping through chapel, with students sleeping, not paying attention, going to the state university, students that could care less about Christ or anything that had to do with it. So these two brothers are John and Charles Wesley. So John and Charles Wesley, if you don't know this, right, they're the founders of Methodism. And you wonder, well, how does that work? Well, what does that mean and what is that important to us? Well, they decided to form a small group of students. And when I say small, I literally mean small. Right? There's about 4 or 5, 6 students, and there were 2 already of them, that decided we're going to meet together on a regular basis, and we're going to have devotions together, and we're going to read the Bible together, and we're going to keep each other accountable, and we're going to help each other grow in our understanding of the Bible and our understanding of God. We're going to help each other out in this process, right? So they develop a method, right, where they're like, we're gonna pray on this day, we're gonna meet on this day, we're gonna read the Bible on this day, and we're gonna do it this way, right? But what happens is the rest of the students could care less. So they started making fun of them. Look at this guys. What's wrong with these guys? They don't know about Henry VIII, and how the church is just there to scratch the back of the king, and the king is there to scratch the back of the church. So they just couldn't believe how these guys were dedicating time to do this. Now, both of them, right, came from a poor house, right? Their dad was also a pastor, and a pastor was actually a pretty good job at the time. But his dad was not very good with money to the point that his dad went to jail for not paying debts, right? So there were debtors' debts, jail. So they put him in jail because he didn't pay. So John and Charles Wesley went to bed multiple times without nothing in their bellies, right? And they were in a very big family with very little resources because of his dad and how he behaved and the decisions he made. So they get a scholarship to come. They're like, I come here all the way from my home to be able to get this opportunity to be in this nice university. I am not going to take it for granted. So they start working together in this group. They start, again, 5, 6 people. That's it, right? There are only 5 or 6 in an ocean of people who didn't care. And it is this, I think we have a slide for this. It is this methodical habits of studying the Bible and this devotion, right? We're going to meet on this day. We're going to study this way. We're going to do it on this day. We're going to do it. It is this process of reference that the rest of the students started looking at them and calling them Methodists because they follow a methodical habit or process. So our church is a Methodist church, right? And so Methodists started as an insult, making fun of them. Look at this Methodists, right? Actually, it's more like today, I think. I mean, every time I learn a new term from our young people, then that means that term has died, right? Like by the time I learn it, it's gone. But for a while, right, still new to me, but for a while there was this term of try hard. You're a try hard. You're try hard, right? Which meant you were trying to be the best student, or you're just trying hard. You're trying too hard. So if the church, if they would have done that in this year, then we might be in the church of the tryhards or something like that, right? But that's where Methodist and Methodism comes from. So it was an insult for people who were trying to study the Bible and commit to it. So I want to share with you one of those verses that they study together that on a regular basis, that they meet on a regular basis to be able to study, to be able to understand, and to be able to grow from it. And it's Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 to 19. Now, you should know the book of Ephesians, or many of you should know the book of Ephesians because we spent the last summer, right, the whole summer in the book of Ephesians, and we worked through it. But this specific, right, chapter 3 is a prayer from Paul to those who are reading the story, what he hopes they will be able to accomplish and what the hopes they have to be able to understand. So let's read through it quickly. Verse 14 reads like this. For this reason, again, this is one of those verses that this group decided to study, to work to, right? And understand this, from that 5, 6 people, Charles Whitmore, John Wesley, Charles Wesley, it comes the Methodist movement, the Wesleyan movement, the Holiness movement, and the Pentecostal movement. All those 4 movements can raise their roots back to those 4 or 5 young guys, young students that decided to meet together. So out of that group came out millions upon millions of people that in all over the world, right, that you never would have imagined. But out of that group comes the whole Pentecostal movement, the whole Methodist movement, the Holiness movement, and the Wesleyan movement, right? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands upon thousands of churches come out of that initiative that they started. And this, again, is one of those verses that they studied together. It says, for this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and earth derives its name. Again, this is Paul talking to the Ephesians. And pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with the power to his Spirit in your inner being. Now, think about that, right? We tend to think that when we go into difficult situations, when we are trying to go deep and everybody's trying to be shallow, we think that we get to those situations by our own strength, by our strong will. I want to be able to do this. I'm going to will myself to be able to do it. I'm going to commit to it. But yet it says here that the reality is that the power that you may find in your inner being has more to do with the strength of God than with your strong will. Right? It literally says, right, that I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. So the strength, you're not the source of the strength. It's God is the source of the strength in your life. So no matter what you're going through, what difficulty, what journey, what storm you're going through, the reality is that your strength comes from God. It's not about how strong you can be, but it's about how strong God is in you. Verse 17. so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, right? And that through faith, not through the power of Henry VIII, not by the church indulgences, not by the power of governments or whatever the case, but through faith. Every single one of us have access to the throne of grace, and we can come, for Christ can come to dwell in our hearts by grace through faith, right? It's true. If I'm willing to trust God with this process, if I'm willing to trust God, God is all in your life. And I pray that you being rooted and established in love. And this is important for us to be able to keep in mind. What keeps us rooted and established is not your own strength, but the love of Christ. Right? What keeps you rooted, right? When the storm comes, when the difficulty comes, when the challenge comes, what keeps you rooted, what keeps you together, what gives you a foundation is the love of Christ. Right? No matter what storm you're going through, what keeps you rooted is the love of Christ. Verse 18, may have power together with all of the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide, how long, how high, how deep is the love of Christ. You know what that means ultimately? And this was true for the Wesley brothers. This was true for me, and it is true for you today. That without other holy people in our lives, without a community of holy people who gather around us, we lose perspective of the dimensions of the love of Christ. Have you ever, right, like had to buy clothes for somebody, or had to buy a piece of wood or cloth or something like that for something, and you're like, I think it's this big, or like, I don't know, I think it's a lot bigger. No, I think it was like this big. No, it was bigger. And when you get there, you're like, oh, yes, I don't have enough, right? Have you ever experienced that before? I see a lot of nods, and a lot of people nodding, right? We experienced that before because we lose perspective of the size, right? So what this verse is trying to say, if you don't have holy people around you, right? Again, we think about growing deep. We usually think about our effort. I'm going to go harder, right? Instead of that, what this verse is trying to say, no, is first, all right, you want to go deep? Perfect. Number one, the love of God. Number two, a community of people around you. Because you lose perspective of the love of Christ, and you might be drowning, and it's almost like other people could come around you and say, if you only knew how much God loves you. If you only understood how much Christ loves you, then you will not be in the situation that you find yourself in. But when we're in the situation, we lose perspective, right? When we lose perspective, literally how deep, how wide, how long, how high is the love of Christ for us. Verse 19 closes with this. And to know with this love that surpasses knowledge, right? So it's not just something I memorize. All right, let me go grow in my relationship with God. Let me memorize everything. No, it's not something that you simply can get in your mind just by knowledge. It surpasses, the love of Christ surpasses all knowledge, that you may be filled with to the measure of all the fullness of God. So your deepest level is about your willingness to trust God, to believe in the strength that God gives you, to keep perspective of the love of Christ for you by your community and the people that you decide to share life with. That's how you grow deep. It's not how strong you are. It's not how versed I am or how much I know or any of those factors. So, with that in mind, right, when we think about the love of Christ, I want to challenge you with this question as we close our time together. And again, our small groups, if you're committed to one of those small groups, they will go deeper into this question this week. Which one you tend to underestimate or overestimate? Which one do you measure wrong most of the time? When you try to measure and to get a perspective, which one you get wrong? Our sinfulness or the love of Christ for us? And why? I mean, I can tell you that myself, I often tend to underestimate the love of Christ and overestimate my sinfulness. I tend to hyper-focus in my brokenness. and to underestimate the influence that the love of Christ has in my life. And oh, how sad it is, right, when we find ourselves in that reality.